Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. The world's biggest sporting event, the 33rd Summer Olympics, will begin next week in Paris. Following the largest ever opening ceremony, more than 10,000 athletes will compete in front of millions of spectators. But Paris 2024 has also promised to be the greenest Games ever. To find out how the organisers plan to pull that off, I spoke to the head of sustainability at the International Olympic Committee, Michel Lemaitre. When it comes to hosting the Olympics, we know there are three things that everyone wants: that it's on time, non-negotiable, that it's on budget, a movable feast, perhaps, and that the host city leaves a legacy, those long-term benefits for the host city, for its people. What's the Paris legacy going to be?
Paris 2024 will be the first edition to fully benefit from a strategic roadmap, Olympic Agenda 2020. And as such, it will also benefit from the emphasis we have put on sustainability as part of this strategy. From the early stages, we made very clear that we expected from future hosts to embed sustainability at the very heart of their project, which meant as well, we were convinced that the benefits, the long-term benefits, had to be created even before the Games take place. And in the case of Paris, already millions of citizens and people in France and in Paris have benefited from the Games, especially because the Games vision was to put more sport in their daily life, and it's already delivered. And we know for sure that the organizing committee has been working with different stakeholders to keep this momentum after the Games.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because you say that Paris 2024 is going to be the Games of sustainability. So really, Paris is going green as well as going for gold. What role has the IOC had in helping shape that direction?
So, as I said, sustainability was really one of the key pillars of our strategy, and from the early stage we made very explicit that we expected the organizers to embed that from day one in their journey. And this is what Paris has been doing. Just remember, the agenda was approved in 2014. 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks later, we started the engagement with future hosts, one of which was Paris. So from day one, the conversation was on how the Games could actually bring something to the city of Paris in terms of sustainable development, but also be delivered in a very responsible manner. It meant that we had criteria in the host city contract. We were bringing support to the host city for them to deliver sustainably. And what Paris has done is to set their ambition very clearly from the beginning by setting to everyone they would cut their budget, their carbon budget by half. And they have delivered through a different mechanism.
But in the past, cities transformed and then they developed to accommodate the Games. So how are you adapting that model to be smarter, to be cleaner, to be greener?
You're right. In the past, the expectations was for the cities to adapt to a product, the Olympic Games. We have radically shifted the approach with the agenda. Now we really engage in a very open dialogue with a future host, that might not be cities actually, but a region or country, on how the Games can benefit their region in terms of sustainable development. And we made also very clear as part of this strategy that we don't want any new venues, for instance, to be built for the sake of the Olympic Games, but we really want to leverage to the maximum what already exists.
Accessibility is also important, though.
Accessibility is key. I mean, as you see in Paris, the Games are really inclusive of all, whether they are people with disabilities or women, as it will be the first Games to reach full parity, and also very inclusive of small businesses and social businesses, because the economic impact has benefited also very small structures. 500 of social businesses have been created for delivering the Games.
Well, sustainability goes hand in hand with climate resilience planning. So let's talk about that a little bit. Underground electricity lines, a noise barrier along the motorways around Paris, more pollution remediation, plans to clean the River Seine. Wouldn't these projects have happened anyway, with or without the Olympics coming to town?
So eventually this project will have happened, and they might have taken, another 50 years. What we see every time with the Games is the convening power of the Olympic symbol is such, and the fact that we have a timing that cannot be moved, which creates a sense of urgency. Thanks to this two dimension, the Games accelerate project. And this is why, as a Parisian, I can tell you that, I've been hearing about the cleaning of the Seine for 50 years. I was born very, very near the Seine, and eventually it will have happened. But the fact that we have the Games have accelerated this collective action, and it's going to be done.
Paris 2024 has calculated its material footprint. This is a first, isn't it, in the history of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. But what exactly is that, and why does it matter?
So it's true that Paris has been innovative in many different ways in terms of sustainability. And besides their carbon footprints, they have done this materiality footprint, which means that they have made the inventory of all the goods and equipment they would need to deliver the Games. So from furniture to cars to sport equipment to temporary infrastructure, a long, very long list of things. And then they have asked themselves, can we do more with less? So how can we reduce? So for instance, they reduce by 40% the fleet that will be used by athletes and officials, or they have cut by 25% the furniture. And now, after that, they said, okay, how can we procure these items? Can we rent them instead of buying? And what will be the second life? And they have sought and contracted the second life as part of their purchase or renting, which means that today, as we speak, 90% of all the goods and infrastructures or product have already a second life secured, even before the Games take place, which is a first.
So that's all part of the reuse and recycle approach. And I suppose that the fact too that I think 95% of Paris 2024 will be hosted in existing buildings or temporary setups.
Yes, it is indeed a circular economic approach that we very much encourage. So it goes from the equipment to the venues, and indeed we expect this to continue in the future.
Is that how you really see events like this working in the future? Because yes, you've worked very, very closely with Paris and you're embedding some of these criteria into, I suppose, the contracts for hosting the Games. So no more building huge stadiums, no more building structures that are essentially there for the Games.
So as part of our strategy is very clear. We want to maximize the use of what exists. So permanent existing venues in the host territory that can be a city, a region, or a country. And we even encourage, the host, if the host doesn't have this venue in the vicinity, to partner with another country, possibly, to host the Games. So we have built in a lot of flexibility in the system to prevent any new venue to be built just for the sake of the Games. And then we maximize the use of temporary ones. So that's indeed the direction. Unless there is a long-term need, because you are in a city, for instance, that is growing and which has long-term needs for sport infrastructure. And in this case, the authorities will build, not just for the Games, but for the long term, and we will be using them.
I'm interested that this massive inventory that you talked about, and it makes me think about Tokyo, where I think they used cardboard to make the beds for the athletes. And in Paris, they're looking at recycled fishing nets to construct the beds out of. Are things like that just gimmicks to grab headlines, or do you think this is the future?
So what you have in the Games, you have different things. You have the symbolic elements, like the beds or the torch or the medal or the podium, which are highly symbolic, highly visible, and that can, if you wish, communicate your ambition in terms of sustainability. And then you have many other things that happen behind the scene in an invisible manner. Like, for instance, in Paris, one of the major measures they have taken for the first time at this scale is to connect every sport venue to the grid, to the energy grid, which will be 100% powered by renewable energy, and get rid of the diesel generators to power the whole events. And this is new, and this will leave a legacy, because some venues, even downtown in the city of Paris, like in La Concorde, will be in the future connected through the grid.
So there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of innovation. Where else is that being used to new or great effect?
It's true that the Games are really a catalyst for showcasing innovations, not only through technology. I'll give you a few examples. For instance, the company that was in charge of the few constructions for the Games, like the aquatic centers or the Olympic Village, had an innovation fund. to find out, what could be done differently and more sustainably in construction to create first. So this is how they really used at scale wood to construct, the Olympic Village, or how they used at scale also recycled concrete. That's one example. But there is a lot of innovation in terms of methodologies that do not require, for instance, technology. Like, for instance, Paris 2024 has been enhancing the ISO certification for major events. It was developed in London, but it was very much focused on environment. And now with the Games in Paris, it encompasses all environmental and social aspects. So this will be a legacy of the Games in terms of methodology that can be used by other major events and that didn't require technology, but is an innovation.
Marie, it's not only going to be the greenest Games, but arguably it's going to be the most expensive Games, certainly for spectators. Do you think those things are inextricably linked?
They will be definitely the most sustainable Games today in France. And they won't be the most expensive Games, as the tickets, half of the tickets will be under 50 euros, and most of the people will actually experience the Games for free, whether they will experience it through the screens or whether they will be able to attend live events in France or abroad. But for sure, they will be the most sustainable Games they can be in a special context. And as you know, they are been reaching this level because Paris 2024 is maximizing the use of existing venues. They are also maximizing the use of the very dense public transportation system, and all the venues will be located in the 10 kilometers around the village. But they're also powering all the venues with renewable energy. So all this contributes to halving the carbon footprint of the Games.
Halving the carbon footprint, but come on, this is costing to be innovative, to employ all of this technology, to make it greener to start with. It's expensive.
It's interesting because for me it's a misinterpretation. Sustainability actually is leading to reducing cost because, especially in the case of Paris, it's all about doing more with less. So if you cut quantities, you cut cost, and they have massively cut quantities.
You talk about this goal that you say is achieved of Paris halving the CO2 emissions compared to some of the previous Games to 3.5 million tonnes. I mean, Tokyo didn't even have spectators, so that kind of skewed the numbers, if you like. Is that really then a proper gauge of where things are going and how true that reduction in CO2 emissions is?
So you're right in saying that Tokyo didn't have spectators. This is why we do not take actually Tokyo as a benchmark. Actually, when Paris is saying that they have carbon footprint compared to previous editions, we are comparing it to the average of London and Rio. So Tokyo is not part of the equation. And here, I think what was very innovative in the case of Paris is that they set this ambition up front. In the past, in the previous editions, and also we learn by doing, and because, we are becoming more clever, all of us, in terms of managing a carbon footprint. It was about measuring the carbon footprint and identifying some measures to reduce it, and eventually measuring the impact at the end. Here, Paris has set up front a carbon budget, like their financial budget, and they said to the entire staff, as well as the entire stakeholder, that they had to work within it, and they worked within constraints. And this is why they have reached their objective.
Is this really going to make a difference, do you think, to global emissions? I mean, after all, you want to be sustainable, but it is a 2-week sporting event.
Yeah, you are right to say that we are only 2 weeks sporting events, and in that sense, a contribution to the global emissions is probably not as great as other industry. However, we are very conscious that we come with a footprint like any other activity. And as such, we take our responsibility very seriously, whether it's at the IOC, where we are cutting emissions as we speak also, and we have a first goal to reach 30% reduction by 2024, and ultimately to be aligned with the Paris Agreement by 2030, whether it's for the Games, or whether it's engaging the entire Olympic movement through the platform we have created, Sport for Climate, with the Convention of Climate from the UN. And we are really engaging the whole sport movement at scale to join forces to reach the Paris Agreement commitment.
So that symbolism is actually really important.
Yeah, I mean, for us, really, we take also a leadership role very seriously, not just because the Games are a powerful way to inspire billions through their reach, but also as leader of the Olympic movement, we see a role as creating this global platform to aggregate collective action at scale. to make an impact.
So while Paris 2024 is focusing on sustainability and hoping to reshape the model for future Olympic Games, are you then looking to those Games in the future? Are you looking to Los Angeles 2028 and Brisbane 2032? I mean, what are those Games going to look like, do you think, in terms of sustainability?
So we look forward to them, but we also work with them already, because as you may remember, Los Angeles 28 has been awarded at the same time as Paris. So we are already really working closely with LA 28 and as well Brisbane 32. So if you look towards LA 28, here what will be interesting is it's a radical reuse approach. So it's a huge city, Los Angeles, with a lot of sport infrastructure.
And a lot of traffic.
A lot of traffic. And the idea is actually to use as much as possible all the existing venue, and there will be no single permanent venue being built. Actually, it's a very interesting case because the Coliseum, which hosted already the Games in 1932 and in 1984, will be reused for the third time in history. And that's, exceptional and shows the extent to which you can really leverage what exists.
But it limits the amount of spectators who can come in person.
It does limit the amount of spectators, but looking towards 28, and you see already so much innovation in the making in Paris, we will have many more ways to experience the Games. So even not being on site. So these are the things that, make it much diverse. We will have much more options for people to experience the Games.
You are very much a solution finder. You're looking to the positives. You know where to find the experts that can mobilise the change that needs to happen. But the World Economic Forum said that by 2034, environmental risks will make up 4 out of the top 5 global risks. Do you think that means that huge sporting events like the Olympic Games, like the Paralympic Games, that bring hundreds of thousands of people from across the world together, are they all essentially doomed?
First of all, as the World Economic Forum says, it's true that all the environmental risks are amazingly important for all of us, but also for sport, whether it's climate, or whether it's a loss of biodiversity. And we are all affected by that, including ourselves, and we are really trying very hard to take actions to limit our impact. And with a role to be also a showcase for innovation, we are a platform to spread, innovation at scale. And beyond that, beyond reducing a footprint as much as possible, especially in these days where there are conflicts and, tensions in the world, we really see also a role as maximizing the positive impact of bringing the world together and leveraging as much as possible this symbol of hope, of uniting the world in all its diversity. So it's really finding the best way to maximize the social impact we can bring, as well as continue to reduce our footprint.
Marie Sallois, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Olympics is the second major sporting event to take place in Europe this summer. More than 2 million football fans have already enjoyed 48 matches across Germany as part of Euro 2024. Ahead of the tournament, UEFA commissioned a feasibility study into how to minimise the tournament's environmental impact. One of its authors, Dr. Martin Kames, senior researcher at the Öko-Institut, joins me now from Berlin. Thanks ever so much, Doctor, for coming on the programme. Now, look, I mentioned you were one of the authors of this big feasibility study into how this tournament could have been more sustainable, could be the most sustainable European Championships ever. Where exactly do you start with a report like that?
Yeah, thank you. We looked into what we called an ex-ante balance. So we looked into the potential emissions which may turn out and the potential environmental impacts of the tournament. And we identified that almost 500,000 tons of CO2 would be emitted through that. And based on that, we made suggestions how the emissions can be reduced. In addition to the emissions, greenhouse gas emission, we also looked into other environmental impacts, but then the main focus was on greenhouse gas emissions.
Sustainability in football is quite hard to measure. So what has been done at this tournament to make it greener and cleaner?
Yeah. I think first of all, it's important to know that of the 500,000 tons of CO2, which is equivalent to a small city with 660,000 inhabitants in Germany, for example, that 85% of the emissions are from transport. And from these transport emissions, more than half are from the incoming fans. So therefore, also transport is a key in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The key measure are all related to transport.
I do want to talk a little bit about transport and travel in more detail in a moment, but tell me, is the aim to make tournaments like this climate neutral or just more responsible when it comes to emissions?
Yeah, I think this is also something which we kind of tested or at least suggested as a research institute for the first time for such a tournament so that we suggested don't to aim at climate neutrality, because that can be only achieved by offset credits, so offsetting the emissions somewhere else, and that has a lot of disadvantages. But looking at climate responsibility, saying, okay, we don't aim to be climate neutral, but we want to reduce emission in the first place, but then also take responsibility for the remaining emissions, which we can't reduce right now. And this is because I think not all the energy supply, just to name one example in Germany, is from renewable energies, and a lot of transport is also based on fossil fuels. So there are certainly remaining emissions, and we then looked how we could deal with these remaining emissions.
Unlike something like the Olympics, for the Euros, for football tournaments, you don't tend to need to build new big stadiums. They're already in place in the host country, in the host cities, and that will help hugely, I'd imagine, with sustainability goals. But do you think that maybe skews the figures a little bit in comparison to other sporting tournaments?
Yeah, of course. We didn't compare different tournaments except for the Euro 2016. So there was a comparison in terms of transport emissions, but not with other sport events. And I agree with you that I think different sport events like the Olympics or a football tournament are quite different if you have to construct. But of course, also if you compare football events, so World Championships, the next one will be in 3 countries, which is certainly will result in more transport emissions. And the second next one, World Championship, will be even in 3 continents. I'm not sure whether that is really in favor of sustainability to organize tournaments like that. But of course, I understand it's also always a trade-off between bringing people together, enhancing common understanding and have fun as well. But on the other hand, we also have to think about the environment.
Let's talk about bringing people together, because you do keep mentioning transport and travel. And, you know, admittedly, for the Euros, there are far fewer players than there are in competitions like the Olympic Games. But there is still that issues of millions of fans getting to and from all of the different fixtures. Are their trips becoming more sustainable?
Yeah, the first thing is, of course, to reduce the amount of transport. And to some extent, this is difficult in advance because you only know in the last minute or just months before who really will, which countries will participate in such international tournaments. But still, one trick was that at least in the first round, that there were clusters of games. So all games in one group were in the same area. For example, there were 3 clusters of stadiums. One was in the west, there were 4 stadiums. Then in the south, there were 3 stadiums. And in north and east, there were 3 stadiums. And all the groups played in each of such a cluster. And that reduced the transport emissions at least or the transport, by 13%, not the emissions, but the transport amount or the number of transport. And aviation was reduced by, I think there was only one planned trip in the first group period. And then most of the time, the teams were traveling by buses or trains. And that is not only for the teams, but also, of course, for the fans who also travel between different cities in Germany during the tournament.
What other ways can football work on its climate goals? A circular economy for boots, for example, renewable energy in stadiums. I just wonder what the opportunities are to make football greener.
Yeah, I think the first thing is always look at how the fans travel to the stadium, because I think they cause the strongest emissions and or the most of the emissions. So if you, for example, provide public transport within the city, and then also specific tickets for trains traveling to the city, this reduces emissions the most. And then the second approach, which we suggested here, was the climate responsibility, because with all the remaining emissions, there was a fee, you could say, or a tariff, which was calculated to or was multiplied with the remaining emissions in order to determine a budget. And this budget is then used within the football associations to really reduce further their emissions through, as you mentioned, for example, LEDs at the stadiums or PV panels or charging stations for electric vehicles. So all this could also contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of football teams and associations.
Dr. Martin Kames, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Marie Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.